Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this installment of the Hunt Institute's Post-Secondary Pathways webinar. We are excited to have you. We'll give folks about 2 more minutes to log in, and then we'll get going. About 2 more minutes. Just want to say welcome again to those that are joining us. The audience is starting to fill up. As we posted in the chat, feel free to let us know where you're coming from as you log in today, where you're listening from. We'll give folks about 60 more seconds and then we'll get started with this special webinar. All right, welcome again to our next installment of the Hunt Institute's Post-Secondary Pathways webinar. We've got a great webinar for you today, including some of our great partners from Jobs for the Future, also known as JFF. Excited for this conversation behind the walls and post-release, supporting learners impacted by the legal system. Before we begin and turn it over to Rebecca, I want to just give some housekeeping reminders for everyone. The chat is open. Feel free to put your comments in there, but know that we'll be taking Q&A from the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom webinar feature. So as we get time later in the conversation for audience Q&A, please make sure you're putting your questions in the Q&A function and not the chat function. We are live on Facebook as well, and then we'll have this on YouTube shortly after the stream completes. So feel free to share it widely with your networks and check back in. We'll also have some key takeaways that we publish on our blog as well. Lastly, there's a closed caption is available for anyone that wants to use that. So just navigate to the closed caption spot on your webinar link, and that'll make sure those get opened up for you. But again, we're super excited that you're here with us today for this installment of the Hunt Institute's Post-Secondary Pathways webinar. Our goal in these is really to dive into different conversations that can spark interest to engage different skill sets and understandings of post-secondary students and access and success. And so this is a very timely conversation that we're having today with our partners from Jobs for the Future. So with that, I will turn the floor over to Rebecca and let her open it up from JFF and begin the webinar. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks so much, Winn. Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. My name is Rebecca Villarreal, and I serve as a Senior Director in Jobs for the Future Center for Justice and Economic Advancement. And just on behalf of JFF, thank you to Winn, Julia, the entire team at the Hunt Institute for collaborating on today's event. JFF, for folks who may not be familiar with us, is a national organization that drives transformation of the American workforce and education systems to achieve equitable economic advancement for all. And within the Center for Justice and Economic Advancement, we are laser focused on economic advancement for people with records. We launched just over a year ago, and we're collaborating with experts with lived experience, both internally to JFF and beyond, as we work across the field in policy and practice to normalize opportunity to education, employment, and benefits for the 70 million Americans with past convictions. Our center supports employers as they commit to fair chance hiring, working to expand the universe of opportunities for quality jobs and career pathways available for scholars with records. We also support talent development efforts, so working with education and training providers, colleges, universities, community-based organizations, workforce training entities to ensure that people who have been impacted by the criminal legal system have access to high quality education and training opportunities that lead to quality jobs and family sustaining or thriving wages. And I'm really hoping that's why you are all tuning in today. After nearly 30 years, Pell Grant eligibility for learners who are currently incarcerated will be restored on July 1st of 2023. This is a moment that the field has been advocating for years, and yet Pell restoration is just one piece of this important work. We need colleges, universities, community-based organizations, policymakers, and employers working in concert to fully realize the opportunity of this moment. Our panelists represent a couple of these important constituencies, and I'm looking forward to a dynamic conversation with them. In terms of today's format, as Winn previewed, I'm going to have some opening questions and have them introduce themselves, and then we'll quickly turn to audience questions using the Q&A function. I have a couple of questions to get us started, but want to make sure that we're surfacing the great questions from you all. One important note as we kick off today's conversation, at JFF, we want to make sure that the way we use language in all of our forms of all of our work promotes equity, dignity, and an asset-based mindset. We use person first or people first language, which emphasizes each person's humanity over any particular characteristic. You'll hear our presenters use a range of humanizing phrases throughout today's session. We really encourage folks to use person first language, both in the chat and in the questions throughout today's session. We're going to go ahead and drop a couple of resources into the chat for folks that might be newer to this topic. So first, James, I'd love to start with you. You are the executive director for the Reentry Campus Program, which is a community-based organization out of Rhode Island. Thank you so much for being here today. Your organization leads under the charge that education is the surest way to break the cycles of poverty, incarceration, and systemic oppression. And while we know education is critical, we know that access to it can be really difficult for this particular population. Tell us a little bit about Reentry Campus Program and the importance of community-based organizations in holistically supporting folks that have been system impacted.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for having me, everybody. Reentry Campus Program is basically a program that has a mission to increase access to affordable post-secondary education and certification options for people inside prison. And one of the reasons I have the unfortunate experience of being incarcerated in the late 80s, early 90s, especially when the crime bill was passed, Bill Clinton's crime bill, which increased our prison population astronomically. And as a result of that, not only was the prison population increased, the resources, the education and everything, the stuff that would help us to be able to properly prepare ourselves to re-enter society, rehabilitation was decreased. And now we have a situation where as though we have an enormous amount of people inside prison. And we all know that, yes, education is the surest way to break the cycles of poverty and reduce recidivism, but we cannot go back to a system of providing education and resources inside prison in the same way we did when the population was smaller than it is now, because we're not reaching the amount of people that we need to reach inside the prison system. So for me, it's the reentry campus is important because prisons aren't set up like college campuses. They're in a nutshell, they are prisons, but at the same time, 80 to 90% of those people are coming home. And how do we want them to be released? We're in a new society. We're in a new economy. We know we failed a lot of these individuals. And we can say that because of the response we have to the opioid crisis compared to the response we had under the crack epidemic, where people were giving long prison sentences. So how are we preparing these people who were given these long prison sentences, who are now coming home to a new society and a new economy where education and and certification and training is a must in order for them to just basically compete. My saying, I always say it, it's one thing to be locked up in prison, but it's another thing to be locked out of society. And if we do not create supportive systems for them to be able to re-enter society, we make it almost inevitable that most of them are put in a position where as though they end up going back to prison. So I think for me, my own personal experience, reentry should start, supports for reentry should start at sentencing. And this is the point where, so I've gotten this much time. What do I want to do with this time that I have to make sure that this never happens again? How am I going to prepare myself for release? And the supports come from the people inside prison. We need programs, we need access, we need access points to services that will allow me to prepare for this. And then post-release, it's like I always say this, is like going to school in prison is not the same thing as going to school outside of prison, because life on life terms shows up really fast when you're released. And you have competing demands. You have family responsibilities, you have court responsibilities, you have work responsibilities, you have all of these responsibilities. And how is a person to navigate a world of academics while at the same time being recently released, having to navigate all of these supports? I think community-based organizations play a really important role because we are the ones that have gone, a lot of us are directly impacted, we're formerly incarcerated. We are the ones that have gone through this, and we can help with these individuals being able to navigate these systems of just being recently released, while at the same time, while we're helping them with that, they're more capable of focusing on education. I think every school system has some sort of support programs. And I think when you say 70 million people, Rebecca, I think we need to provide more supports for these individuals that are relative to the experiences that they have faced, so they can focus on their academics.
Great. Thanks so much, James. And it's a transition segue for Terrell. So Terrell Blount, you are the director of the formerly incarcerated college graduates network, which is a national nonprofit organization of over 1,400 formerly incarcerated scholars spread across 45 states, 4 countries. You all are growing. So thanks so much for being here with us today. And how do we make sure that we are actively engaging folks that have direct lived experience as we create new programs, as we create new policies? Tell us why it's so important to really center folks with lived experience in the development of these initiatives.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca, for having me. And, you know, just saying a quick hello to everyone in the audience. I strongly believe, as well as the organization that I lead, that there's power within our community as formerly incarcerated people to be able to make contributions to all sorts of fields, not just the justice reform space or you know, reentry space. We truly believe at FICGN that our members, the folks in our network, have the gifts, abilities, you know, competencies, and everything else to be able to contribute at an organization, whether it's working in engineering, science, healthcare, you name it. You know, we focus on, as you mentioned in your introductions, the asset approach. We don't look at our incarceration as, you know, a negative, and a lot of our work would be focused on, you know, getting employers and other people in positions of power to understand that it's not something that should inhibit us or prohibit us from, you know, obtaining these roles and succeeding in them. And I think, you know, whether you're familiar with the term like nothing about us, or nothing about us without us, or, you know, even Glenn Martin's famous saying around people being closest to the issues, normally being closest to the having the solutions, but furthest away from the power and, you know, resources. either one of those, really speak to, when I apply this to the work of like higher education in prison, what that looks like for programs that are going to access Pell Grants for the very first time is, think about that incarcerated student population that you're planning on serving. As James mentioned, it's not the same as going to college on the outside where you just have a plethora of, degree paths that you can take on. It's very different on the inside. And if we're leading with that and knowing that we may be only able to offer 2 or 3, in a lot of cases, just one degree path, what is it that the population wants? If we listen to them and see what it is that they want to learn, what you're doing is giving them informed decisions. You're really creating or starting that path for your incarcerated learners to be involved in decision-making processes, which is the total opposite of what is really embraced in a correctional setting, where you're taught to obey, follow the last directive, so on and so forth. And your days are pretty much planned in terms of the institution. But by a college or education institution coming inside and saying, well, instead of us deciding that we want to offer a liberal arts degree, let's see what it is that they want. Let's give them several options. And that way, you're preventing yourself from, really having that power and making it more of a democratic process where folks, you can engage the students and see what it is that they want to take on. And that's just one example, but my point is really to get folks to not be in this mode of like, we're the service provider and the incarcerated person is the client, and we know what's best for you. We know what you need and how you need it. Instead, these are some brilliant individuals, and as long as you give them the tools and information, you should be able to encourage them to make informed decisions. That's what we want, is for people to make informed decisions, whether or not they even want to, enroll in college while incarcerated. They may say, hey, this degree program is not something I want to use my Pell Grant for. And instead, I'll work with Reentry Campus Program, or I'll work with FICGN or THEI and start my education journey on the inside. That's what we should want for, incarcerated people, to make those informed decisions and not feel like they have to enroll in this particular program so that they can be set up for success when they come home.
That's exactly right, Terrell. I think that the idea of having multiple choices in multiple facilities is so important, and that often requires policy and leadership from multiple entities. We are bringing together colleges as bureaucracies. We are bringing together corrections as bureaucracies. And that requires partnership and collaboration to make sure there are multiple options. And so, Lauren, I'm really excited to have you also join us to round out this panel. And Lauren, you're the coordinator of special programs for correctional education for the Tennessee Board of Regents. And there's some really exciting work happening in Tennessee and building cross-sector partnerships and collaboration. So curious if you could talk a little bit about the importance of those partnerships and what are some of those policies that are really incentivizing these different systems to work together in order to break down barriers and smooth pathways for learners who are currently or formerly incarcerated.
Absolutely. I want to just champion everything that my co-panelists have said, because that's a lot of that has been really instrumental in us creating the systems that we have. One of the biggest questions that we're always asking is who needs a seat at this table, and including those voices of our formerly incarcerated learners is critical. Our alumni give us some of the most important feedback and important points about how we need to move forward in every way. But I think one of the most critical things that we've done from the beginning is we are a system of 5 state agencies and a nonprofit partner. And from the very beginning, we operated from this mindset of let's take some time to intentionally build our vision of where we want to go and then work seamlessly towards that. And it's 5 state agencies and a nonprofit partner. So there are times where, you know, everybody's kind of got their side mission, but we truly do work towards that single-minded vision. We've made sure to get that in our contracts, our documents. A big question we think about is who's on first. How can we leverage available state resources to make sure that students are able to take advantage of everything that is available to them, and how do we connect them with those resources seamlessly? And if you do simple things like create a flow chart, figure out exactly what is everybody's role on the front end, who's supposed to take charge of this item, and how do we connect each person with it, and then how do we connect the individuals or the staff on our end with the persons at each other agency doing that work, and get them face to face so that they know how to help the student from point A to point B to point C. We are not starting from day one thinking about reentry. We're starting from 1 to 2 years pre-release, but we need to be starting from day one. That was huge. That was a big game changer. But yeah, so it's just this idea of colleagues, not competition. How do we work together to get the students that they need? On a main campus, you have what we think of as wraparound support. So we have to build that in as what we consider our circle of support. And we do that through our partnerships like the Higher Education Commission Navigators, providing institution neutral college support. Tennessee Higher Education Initiative, our nonprofit providers providing student support, being that conduit for our students to give us that real-time feedback of what's going on, how it's working, how we think it's working, how it's really working. Department of Corrections to be that voice of it is their house, safety and security. We need to maintain accreditation, and our mission from day one has just been create free world college in a place that it doesn't necessarily exist. And then none of it matters if you don't have that connection to Department of Labor for an in-demand job paying a livable wage. We know that 83% of first-time freshmen are going to college specifically to get a job. And so that's the end goal, not just a job. It needs to be a job tied to what you want to do, paying a livable wage. And those are all things we think about intentionally from the start.
Fantastic. Want to give a quick plug for folks to go ahead and drop questions in the Q&A function. We have a couple that have come in, so we'll weave those in. James, I know you and I have had this conversation quite a bit as you're shaking your head around Lauren talking about education opportunities that are connected to jobs and the importance of folks being able to tap into prior learning, prior work experience. As we talk about the tremendous assets that folks are bringing, one of the key components of RCP or program is around leveraging prior learning assessments, PLAs. I think this is a really underutilized component of educational opportunities for this particular population. And I think with Pell Grants being reinstated, more people need to be thinking about what types of educational experiences have folks been kind of cobbling together over the last 30 years. While there have been some programs operating, folks might have been taking an enrichment here, might have been doing this type of job there. Talk about PLA, what you all are doing at Reentry Campus Program, and how we should be thinking about this as a tool for this particular population.
One of the reasons that I started focusing on PLA is because of my own stuff. I used to take, when they removed Pell Grants outside the prison, the only thing that was left for us were CLEP and Dante's courses. Dante's courses were courses that were created for people in the military who wanted to continue their education, and they're basically challenging exams. And I had taken a lot of these. So by the time I was released and I wanted to get back into school, I had 90 credits. And I had a year left of college to finish because of all the work I had done while inside. But also I had worked post-release. I had worked for a place called the Nonviolence Institute as a discharge planner for the Rhode Island Department of Corrections. And one of the things I do when I'm helping people like 9 months to release is I'm trying to get them ready to re-enter society, and one of those things to get ready for a job. So I'm like, okay, let's build your resume. Do you have any work experience? And I couldn't tell you how many people would sit there and tell me, no, I've never had a job. And I'm, well, you've been sitting here 10 years. What have you been doing here? Oh, I run the kitchen. I've done this program, this program, I completed this certificate, I've completed that, I've completed that. And I'm like, well, don't you, like, the first question I ask them when they tell me that they run the kitchen is, well, how many people do you serve a day? I serve 1,000 people a day, 3 times a day. And I'm like, well, don't you realize the average restaurant out there does not serve 3,000 people a day, and your skill level and your experience is probably supersedes that of somebody that's working in a kitchen outside. And they couldn't make the connection until that was explained to them. And this is prior learning. This is prior learning for a profession that I'm asking you to help me build your resume, and you're telling me you've never had a job. Oh, I run the dog program. Oh, I work in the law library as the clerk. A friend of mine, Andreas Idaraga, he got out of jail. He went to Brown. Then he got his law degree from Yale. Noah Kilroy got his law degree from Roger Williams. I can't tell you how many people I know, but I know where their trajectory started. When people are going to the weight room or they're going to go play cards, these people were running down the law library every day. And that's where they got their some knowledge in regards to what they wanted to do in the profession. So I think prior learning to help people tap into that is important, to help them finish quicker, but also to help them to begin to identify and understand you have a lot of skills and abilities that you don't even know that are untapped, that directly relate to this field and this employment. I had a tool called ONET inside of the Baltimore prison that I was in. And this tool, I can't tell you how important it was for me to look at, okay, this is the profession I want to be in. These are the skills and abilities that I need for that. This is the education level. Then when I built my resume, I saw everything that was missing that I needed to get while I was here to get to this profession when I was released. And to tap into that, to tap into the prior learning, gives me a clear direction of where I need to go from there. So if that makes sense.
It does. And I think this idea of having access to particular resources, to have someone who's had similar experiences ask some of those questions, to be able to say, well, tell me about the work that you've been doing. Tell me about these experiences, can help translate. Terrell, I'm curious to turn to you. We've talked a lot about the importance of having academic advisors to help folks kind of do those crosswalks, other types of student support services. I know the field has evolved quite a bit since you completed your degree, but curious if you could talk a little bit about some of the bright spots that you've seen as colleges and universities are looking to support learners who are currently or formerly incarcerated.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, my experience as a college student, I normally tell folks that I feel like it's so long ago and the field has changed so much that, I think a lot of the things that I experience, most programs don't experience today. But, you see offered now folks having academic counselors that, are responsible for helping them from the moment they enter the program, schedule their courses, make sure they're taking the correct courses because some may not be offered every semester. You have folks now helping individuals prepare for reentry before they come home. So what does that look like in terms of my credits being transferred to a different institution, if that's the case, or if I'm going to continue education on campus, what does that look like? FYI, if you intend on having a process where students who are already enrolled in your university have to reapply when they come home, I think that's something you may want to reconsider. FICGN is already designing some toolkits for folks to kind of address those issues. We You know, I'll save that for later, but helping folks, you know, continue in reentry on campus, I think is something, again, that was not necessarily like in play in the early 2000s with the college programs that existed today. I think Rutgers University does a really good job with their NJ STEP program and helping folks from point A when they first come into the program all the way to becoming an alum. And one thing in particular that I like that the program does is they have meetings every semester in the beginning of each semester, fall and spring. They have like a large step-wide meeting where all alum from any previous year are invited to come meet new students that have come home recently. It's just like a huge like networking event. Of course, there's food and presentations and updates from people's you know, organizations, but that's something that, again, I think colleges should be thinking about as opposed to what the norm is, which is people participate in the program while incarcerated. They may come home and have some you know, conversation or communication with the college, but largely folks are just like out here to navigate on their own. But you really create a sense of community the same way the colleges at large do. They try to engage their alum mostly for giving purposes, but this is an opportunity for us to try to engage our formerly incarcerated learners in an alumni setting and give them a sense of community, especially when folks are moving through like cohort models. And as you just begin adulting and, you know, you growing your families and working in different spots, I think for any of us working on this planet as adults, we know how difficult it is to maintain friendships and stuff like that when life is going on. But if colleges, you know, have reentry work in place with their, you know, alum and create these spaces, it's just a great opportunity for networking and again, establishing community.
Exactly, Terrell. There's a couple of other, in addition to NJ STEP, a couple of other efforts I'd love to raise up. So Project Rebound, which is based at a number of California State University campuses, are really thinking about creating that community, engaging scholars as they're returning on a couple of the campuses, also providing housing, kind of those wraparound support services. As we know, just as Terrell was saying, adulting and establishing connections to family, post-release, this idea of housing, some of the same conversations around basic needs that we're having for college students. We really need to be thinking about this population in particular and what are some of those additional support services that could be really valuable. I know of a couple of other institutions that are taking that Project Rebound model and then applying it to their campus. So I do think that important role that colleges and universities can play in those transitions at reentry is so important. Lauren, I'm curious, I know you ended your opening question around this idea around making sure folks have access to high wage, high growth career paths. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how you all went about that in Tennessee. Were you looking at labor market data? Were you mapping that to the list of collateral consequences? Talk a little bit about how you all identified which programs you'd offer and how that aligns with some of the labor market needs in the state.
Yeah, so we operate in this larger group, the Tennessee Prison College Coalition. We would love for you to join in our work. We just started a professional learning community, and I think Rebecca dropped that in the chat, so please come join us. But one of the big things that we talked about in that group was data sharing. As an agency, Tennessee Board of Regents decided not to look at recidivism. That's not something we would track for our free world students, and we are not going to otherize this population. We just made that decision, we stand by it. But we do really think about what is in demand. A large part of our portfolio are our 27, we represent 40 colleges in the state of Tennessee, so 27 technical colleges, which we call Tennessee College of Applied Technology. And those technical colleges are are directly linked to in-demand employment. Just by nature, they always have to monitor, is a program in demand? Is it paying a livable wage? So dental hygienist is a really interesting career because can you find lots of jobs in that field? Yes, but does it pay a livable wage in the state of Tennessee? Not anymore. So that's a program that was dropped. Welding is a program that you will find at every single TCAT in the state because it's always in demand, it's always going to pay a livable wage. And we're constantly in conversation. Each TCAT has to maintain a local workforce board that makes sure that it's directly aligned with those direct to hire opportunities. Those employers have a chance to kind of have a say into the curriculum and make sure we're skilling our students for those jobs so that they really go to work hireable. And we also have like a training guarantee that says if you come out and you're not trained to your employer standard, we'll retrain you for the first year. So that was just something that we were naturally doing, and we would apply it also to this system, but we do partner with the Department of Labor to get those statistics both statewide and regionally to make sure that what we're offering is going to be something where our students can go to work and get that livable wage. From the community college side, same point. We're constantly evaluating and reevaluating, make sure we're offering something that will work, and then making sure that it's stackable. We want you to know two things. We operate on a guided pathways principle. So we want to think about what you want to be when you grow up and then figure out what degree it's going to take to get you there. And then we want to think about from how you get from point A to point B to point C. So all of our pathways, even though we represent the technical and community colleges, we want to make sure that if you go through that Dyersburg State program at Northwest Correctional and you want to get your bachelor program at Lane College, that's going to transfer seamlessly to that program so that we finish your bachelor and you want to go on to that master program with Lane, our only HBCU, so shameless plug for that, that you can do that whole pathway intentionally, or if you get released, that those credits are still going to transfer seamlessly to your main program. And just to hop on Terrell's bandwagon, if you are not completely admitting your students inside, there are ways to do that. We have a flow chart for that. It is ugly. It involves like 4 different state agencies and our nonprofit partner as a last resort. They will just pay for it. So we are a little bit lucky there, but there are ways, and we've gotten that process down to an hour since we did the flow chart. So yes, we might have to go through 3 state agencies to get that transcript, but we can do that in an hour and make sure we get that student actually enrolled into our college, so that when they transfer at release, or when they release, they're already enrolled in the college and they just keep on keeping on. It's a really smooth transition. So
great. Thank you. So not only continuing kind of the smooth transition to educational opportunities, I think a lot of the conversation, I know we've already touched on it a little bit, is this importance of kind of smooth transition to employment and working opportunities. And so would love all 3 of you to react, or maybe 1 or 2 of you to react to Ved's question, which I think he put in the chat, but is also now in the Q&A. Curious about this idea around internships, fellowships. We already know, though it's really underutilized, that federal work study is available for learners who are currently incarcerated, but how do we really think about mapping the high quality experiences that we know, access to research, high impact practices? AAC&U has done a lot of work in this space. How do we replicate those experiences inside, behind the walls, around research opportunities, around internships, working as a team and working collaboratively? So curious for this group to respond to how would we think about that? How would we imagine internships and fellowships launching in these spaces? Maybe Terrell, I'll put you on the hot seat and then maybe have you take that one first.
Thank you for that. So I think there's largely or historically education, higher education in prison hasn't or has been very difficult to convince of correctional partners, right? And I think with the successful running of programs, I feel like a lot of practitioners often have a sense of or feeling of we don't want to, you know, poke the bear in a lot of cases. The bear being corrections in terms of like, we don't want to be kicked out of the prison or the facility. That would mean the loss of a program, so on and so forth. And from my observations, I'm not saying this is fact, right? I only know from what I've seen that with that type of like mentality or disposition, that anything that we do or mess up, you know, the first thing that happens is we're going to be kicked out of here. Therefore, we're not really going to what they may consider going the extra mile and asking for certain things or asking for more, or what they deserve or what they need for their program, in fear of like, you know, retaliation or whatever the case. I feel like the idea of offering paid internships or, you know, full-time jobs with living wages or part-time jobs with living wages, I'm absolutely embracing it. I feel the field needs to move in that direction. And you know, to Ved's question, him and I are also, you know, possibly exploring like avenues for that. But I think it would take a shift in the mindset of both the colleges and corrections partners to move in that direction. For the colleges, is for some may just be like innovation in terms of like some folks just aren't even thinking about that because they may assume that, you know, this person in prison has their work detail assigned by DOC. And, you know, maybe that's all they need. Or some folks may think that, you know, again, with that disposition, like they're not going to go for that. I'm going to pay this person who's incarcerated, you know, $25 an hour. They're going to laugh at me or something like that. And with corrections, they have to shift the mindset in it being a fair or unfair thing. You know, I can imagine things being thought of or said, such as, you know, that's more than what the correction officers earn, or that's more than what certain people earn, or what am I going to say to the people whose families aren't earning that much? It's things like that that on both sides, it takes a shift in our thinking and how we approach this work, and stop making it be about, you know, who's not getting what, because these individuals are receiving this and it's well earned. If I'm getting a bachelor's degree or a master's degree in prison and I have a sentence that says I may never see the streets again, that doesn't mean that I don't have a family to provide for, a wife or a husband to provide for, children and grandchildren that are being born. That doesn't eliminate my, you know, desires or responsibilities as a parent or a partner to provide for my family. And if people start thinking about that, it restores humanity to individuals. And we're no longer just looking at them as inmates and offenders and convicts who don't deserve. So I know that was a pretty heavy response, I can imagine, but these are conversations that need to be had. And again, that shift has to happen sooner than later.
I want to jump in and echo off Terrell's comment that I think that it's a culture shift. And I think that that's a large part of what we've been trying to do here in Tennessee is change mindsets to convince people of the value of education. And certainly we had a bit of an easier time with education already being free for the bulk of the population with Tennessee Reconnect, Tennessee Promise grants for our free world students. But when you come in and show play that long, slow game, building those partnerships and demonstrate the value of the education, we're at this point now where our partners at correction are coming to us and saying, how do we build in these internships? How do we establish these apprenticeships? And it's a lot easier sell when they've already got that buy-in and they already see the value in. And then you're figuring out how to make these work in multiple systems rather than having to continually sell and say, we need this, we need this, we need this. And it's that mindset shift, excuse me.
Great. One of the other questions that I'm curious for this group to react to is this idea of college prep. what are some of the things that need to happen in order to make sure folks are ready to take advantage of Pell Grant programs, Pell funded programs, or opportunities that are emerging in this moment? So curious, maybe James, maybe I'll turn to you first. What are some things that you're seeing in Rhode Island around kind of getting folks ready to take advantage of credit-bearing opportunities, particularly maybe for folks that have been inside for a while?
I will say that I'm grateful to be working here in Rhode Island. We have a DOC that has been extremely supportive and responsive to education and increasing access to education inside the prison system. And some of the things that we've been working on is we have like a collaboration. It's not just the reentry campus program. It's not just the Community College of Rhode Island. It's not just Roger Williams University, and it's not just College at Blount. These are all the academic entities working inside the prison. We are all working underneath with the support of the DOC collaboratively and sharing information about students that we're working with. In regards to, this is a big fear of mine because we have got Pell back, and the way systems are set up now, and that's why I was saying earlier, we can't just go back to an old way of doing things. There's a lot more people in prison. We're going to start seeing more and more people registering for these programs. But now financial aid is attached to that, academic performance is attached to that, and also completing these courses. And a lot of times people, not a lot of times, in some cases, people inside prison register for these programs for different reasons. It could be for good time. It could be because I just want to get out of my cell, or there's other reasons why people enter these programs. And I think we need to kind of have some tools in place, which we're working on now, is to identify who's here for what. Who's here taking these classes, and what is the ultimate purpose for them taking their classes? What are their goals? So I think there's more that needs to be done. I know we're working collaboratively, but this is a huge issue because you don't want a lot of people accessing Pell without proper, who aren't ready for it, who aren't ready for Pell, and without proper guidance and counseling into what they're signing up for. This population, in a lot of cases, needs to be treated as first-generation students straight out of high school in their application process to college. And I don't think any of us, I'm a parent, I would not let any college program or any program approach my child without giving my child proper counseling guidance and in regards to these programs. And then the ultimate decision is theirs. So I think we need to put these same things in place for people who are entering these programs inside the Department of Corrections.
James, you shared one of your fears. I think one of my fears is, Pell, we had Pell eligibility pre-1994. We had over 800 thriving college and prison programs. And so kind of policy changes, there are cycles of things. Curious about thinking about measuring success, measuring impact. Lauren, you mentioned kind of recidivism as not being kind of a measure of success in the work that you all are doing in Tennessee. Maybe Lauren, I'll start with you, and maybe James, Terrell, if you all want to follow up. What is some of the data that we need to be keeping an eye on to be able to show these anecdotal successes that we know we are having by having increased access to post-secondary education in prison?
Well, I mean, as the Tennessee Board of Regents, we are academics by trade. And so we want to look at the same things that we would look for all of our students. That's a lot of things, but primarily it's retention, persistence. We want to look at graduation. We want to look at success in your program. And what I can tell you is these students do way better than their free world peers. We might have a hard time getting a faculty member in for the first time, but then we have faculty members that come back and complain, and they're like, I don't want to teach on main campus anymore. These students care a lot more, and so then you have a whole other problem that you have to solve. And so those are the stories that we feel like we can tell with data that are just as positive as any story we would tell with recidivism. And just because we're not tracking it doesn't mean that our partners aren't. Dr. Laura Ferguson-Mims, the executive director of THEI, our nonprofit partner, Tennessee Higher Education Initiative, she does a really powerful speech with some statistics, and her statistic, 0% is the number of THEI graduates who have recidivated ever, as in no one. It has never happened. And that's powerful. So, you know, maybe we should be telling that story, but we felt early on, we just made the decision that our partners can maybe tell that story just as well as we could, and we can tell another story we can tell the same story that we tell about our free world students. We don't need to add this barrier to these students. We're just going to see these students as students.
Terrell, James, any thoughts on kind of data and measuring success?
For me, it's like the trajectory, it has to be followed not only inside, it has to be followed outside, because success, I would say failure is pretty much the same for everybody, but success for me may be different than what success is for you. And for me, it was, I know some people go to school because they want to be in academia, but for me, it was, I wanted to be employable. I wanted to have a family. This was my measure of success. So when we're measuring success, for me, I look at it as we have to find a way to track what happens inside, and does the body of work that we've done inside, the support systems, the academics, does this translate to employment and other measures of success for the individuals that were taking part in it. Data, a lot of that has to come from partnerships with the DOC. The DOC plays an important role in this, and also in the programs that they are connected to once they're released. So that's how I see that.
Yeah, just to echo what both Lauren and James, just mentioned, I believe that all of the reasons, or most of the reasons that people use to get into this work, or the reasons why they get into this work, not necessarily use, they are valid. I think, historically people have argued which one matters more, or if at all. And I'm speaking specifically to recidivism versus data overall, employment outcomes, people continuing college on the outside, completing the degree, period, whether or not it makes the prison environment safe. Like, all of those things are important. They do matter. And whether or not, I think it depends on the entity and what they're going to prioritize. So, again, using corrections as an example, a lot of the times they don't want people showing back on their doorstep. They don't want folks to come back. So they do want to know about recidivism and, those metrics. The college is less concerned with that a lot of the times, and they want to get people through to degree completion. And it is going to differ depending on the entity and what they're going to prioritize, but the message should be they all matter in some way, shape, or form. It's just a game of, again, what are you leading with your work? And to denounce any of them, I think, is when you begin to face a little bit of pushback from others who are at the table. But for any of the consortia that exist, or leadership boards or advisory boards or groups, whatever it is, it's really about just managing and understanding, acknowledging that each of the partners that are at the table are there for a specific reason. If everyone can come to the understanding that these things do matter to our other partners, and therefore it should matter to us, even if it's prioritized differently, if we agree that they all matter to us as a group because it matters to someone at this table, I think that's how you can move forward. And I know that doesn't speak specifically to your question, but I can't refrain from making a sound point. So I'll stop there on that though.
So I know we're all really eager to think about Pell Grants being restored July of 2023. There's also, over the last couple of years, some growing momentum around Pell Grants for short-term degrees and credentials. And so would love some reaction from this group around, I know there's a lot of work to do in kind of full program opportunities, associates, bachelor's degree, or other types of career and technical education, but short-term Pell, what could that unlock for this population? Lauren, maybe do you want to start that one?
Yeah, I'll jump in. We know that 95% of all people who are incarcerated will get released at some point, but we don't know at what point in their sentence, in their educational journey. For our farming program, for instance, we are the agriculture state, so it's not kind of what you would think about as traditional farming. It's very hybrid. It contains a number of certificates. Those short-term certificates, things like forklift training, that will get you a livable wage when you get out. So if you have an individual that maybe they just completed their high set right before release and they need something to get them going, the ability to do that forklift training and get out and have something to hang their hat on, that can be instrumental in making success. So little things that we can build into that 1-year certificate in your 2-year AS degree program, that gives you something that you can complete before you get out and life comes at you fast and you're having to manage parole and reentry into your degree program on the outside where there's a lot more going on. Just that transition to getting FAFSA, for our program, it's tuition free for the first 2 years. So just the simple act of, if we can't get your FAFSA done before you get released, because maybe your parole date came up as a surprise to all of us, that can be a barrier. So those short-term certificates that you can get before you get out can make it really huge. Another thing, shameless plug for us, we are thinking about, and we've been thinking about for a really long time, a performance quality indicator tool, which we will share with everybody, because it's not enough to just be thinking about, is your program approved? We want to make sure that our program, it's doing what we think it's doing. Do our students know? How do our students know? How do we continually evaluate and make sure that things are operating smoothly? And you can't just come in and say, yeah, we're going to do some advising. No, how are you going to do that advising? What is the delivery? How frequently is it going to be? Because we know that you have to have all these same services that you're going to have on campus in your college behind bars program. Those students need those services to be just as successful as your on-campus students are going to be, if not more so.
Rhae, James, did either of you want to weigh in on short-term Pell?
Yes. For me, I agree with Lauren. And I think my work with Roger Williams has given me a clear understanding of how important it is to have stackable degree programs, certificates that lead to associates, that lead to bachelors, that lead to masters. Credentials should be gathered along the way, especially for this population. It's a lot to ask for an individual who is, I'm an adult, I'm trying to reenter society, and we know on average for an associate's inside prison, it probably takes, and I'm being generous, 4 to 6 years. Bachelor's, it takes longer because of space availability. And I think these individuals should be given the opportunity, especially to just increase motivation and ambition and drive towards the programs that they're working for, to receive certificates along the way. If we're able to use financial aid and Pell to receive certificates outside of prison, it's kind of, why aren't we able to do that inside prison? So it's just a question that I have. It makes sense.
It certainly does. Thanks so much, James. We didn't get to all of the questions, but we'll certainly work with Winn and the team to get some of the resources and other questions that we didn't make it to answered in that follow-up. Winn, turn to you.
Yeah, thank you everyone for this. Such a great conversation, and All the questions obviously show we need to have this conversation more often and in more spaces. So we will look for ways to continue these conversations. Again, there will be some key takeaways that come out from this on our blog. You can also find the recording on our YouTube as well as the Facebook page. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the Hunt Institute or JFF, and we'll make sure to get those answered. But again, thanks for joining us for our post-secondary pathways webinar. And we look forward to seeing you back here in April when we're going to talk about Title IX and changes to Title IX systems in higher education. So with that, have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you all soon.